this on very sensitive issue as human rights. I want to thank Wem'Afrika for the privilege to be part of this conversation. I'm always very passionate and enthused, when we have such conversations, because it dawns on me that there are still people that are conscious, people that are aware, you know, uh, about the importance of shedding light on the role that human rights play in our everyday life. I will try to share my screen. I struggled to come up with a brief presentation for my topic. I know we talked on LinkedIn and the time frame I really couldn't do a lot, but let me see here. Share screen.
Share your screen? Okay, good.
I see my screen?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. This. Okay. Nice. So yeah, basically I'm trying to get this one out so I can okay. Is it better now? Okay, so yeah, we having this conversation on my topic is on the historical evolution of human rights and the relevance of human rights in the 21st century. Let's check. This should, okay, nice. So human rights, if I want to go by way of a definition, I would say human rights are inherent, inalienable, universal, and legally protected virtues, that accrue to our common humanity. They include privileges we enjoy as an integral part of our anthropology. And by anthropology, I mean our being, as a person. You have these virtues, you have these values that you possess from birth. That is what in today's language has been coined in the term human rights, because it is human and those are your rights. Okay, so bringing the two together from like human rights, these are the inherent, inalienable. Inherent means you're born with it, you possess them. Inalienable, they are not for sale. They are universal because they are generally recognized everywhere, and they are legally protected because there are laws that are put in place at the national level, at the regional level, at the international level to protect these rights against violations, against infringement. So when you as an individual, you are exposed or you're faced with a situation that poses a threat to your enjoyment of these values, of these virtues, of these privileges, then we start speaking of your rights being infringed or your rights being violated. So if we want to go, we look at the topic one for me under that main heading of the historical evolution of human rights. I would want to look at the foundational element of human rights. So first of all, we need to understand that all human rights are based on efforts to preserve human dignity, okay? Human dignity, as simple as it sounds, is the single most important element behind all claims. By human dignity, we mean your right to be valued and respected in your own self, the right to be treated properly, within your workspace, within your family, within your community you have or you detain within yourself. This entitlement, the right to be treated properly, your right to be respected, your right to be valued, and these rights are held by every person, irrespective of age. When it comes to questions or conversations on human dignity, it's not limited to how old you are or where you are in terms of class in society. Every person is entitled to the respect of his or her human dignity. And I would like to mention that human dignity here happens to be it happens to be at the core of every human rights claim. Every human rights, be it first generation rights, civil and political rights, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of press, the right to life, the right to education. You talk about the second generation rights, talk about even third generation rights, the right to, right to peace, right to, we're going to see some of those down in the line, the right to a healthy environment, fourth generation rights, the right to development, the right to sustainable development. All of those things are all efforts, that are geared towards ensuring that human dignity is preserved, human dignity is protected, that each person is giving the value and the respect due to him or her. So it's for me, human rights is all about human dignity. Even when you look at the development, as we're going to see subsequently, to kind of place like a timeline in the development, in the evolution of what we call human rights today, the language of human rights. So I know that most people always try to, point back as far back as 1215 with the Magna Carta, but it goes way beyond the Magna Carta of 1215, right? So we're talking about the Cyrus Cylinder, or the Cyrus Declaration, in 539 BC, during the era of the Babylonian slavery. When Cyrus conquered, took over from Babylon, he had to end the Babylonian slavery and introduce religious liberties and racial equality. So, this was kind of the first, the proton expression, or the proton, appearance of elements of human rights within human civilization. Okay, so once this happened, Cyrus then made this declaration written on, on clay cylinders. That is why they call it the Cyrus Cylinder, which introduced, issues of religious liberties. Now everybody has the right to, follow the religion of your choice, to worship the God of your choice. Because back then, they were all forced to worship the Babylonian god of Baal. With your choice, your opinion on that subject did not matter. But then with coming into play of Cyrus and the Cyrus Cylinder, people became free, to worship your own God of your own choice at your own time. And racial equality conversations then stepped into the scene. We move from 539 BC, witness the Magna Carta of 1215, which introduced the whole concept of the rule of law, and it defined rights and liberties applicable to all persons. It offered protection from arbitrary prosecution and imprisonment. So we begin to see more effort. We begin to see a development of framework, moving away from the Cyrus Cylinder. We are talking now about the Magna Carta. We now have conversations about the rule of law. Every society, every community is governed by set of laws, set of principles. Now, the rule of law, once violated, the society falls back into chaos. And with the coming of chaos, we witness widespread and systematic human rights violations. Let's take, for instance, what is going on today in the world, right, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The rule of law that exists of mutual and peaceful coexistence between states have been broken. The rule of state sovereignty has been violated. And what is going on now, we are witnessing very large scale and systematic human rights violations taking place in the territory of Ukraine. Loss of life, destruction of property, violation of privacy, the quality of life of people deteriorates on a daily. If you follow the news, you would see this development. So once the rule of law is violated within any state, within any community, within any setting, then human rights are, violated on a large scale. So the Magna Carta brought about this whole element of the rule of law, and it gave definition to rights and liberties that are applicable to everybody. Then we move from then, to 1689 with the English Bill of Rights. So this was an act that was signed into law by William III and Mary, who became the co-rulers of England after the overthrow of King James. Those who are students of history, about the American the conflict that took place, with King James being kicked out. He then introduced his own system back then under King James. He even authorized the writing of a Bible on his own terms, the one we have as a King James version. Those are all some of the things that transpired. And when these people came into power after this whole issue, this bill then outlined constitutional and civil rights and ultimately gave parliament power over the monarchy. So the system of administration was systematically changed from a monarch rule system. They then had other, a more structured and a more democratic system where parliament was created, and then powers were then shifted from the monarch to the parliament, and they had to enact constitutional and civil rights. So we begin to see, not just from the canonization in the Magna Carta, we now have an introduction of a system or an institution, which is parliament, a body, charged or mandated, with the responsibility of drafting these laws, these rights, canonizing these rights into legal text. Then you have the French Declaration of the Rights of Man, which represents one of the basic charters of human liberties, containing the principle inspired by the French Revolution. After the English, we had the French. Then we also have the Geneva Conventions of 1949. Now, the Geneva Conventions of 1949 came out, as a result of the Second World War. The carnage that was witnessed on human life, loss of life, the deterioration of life, the quality of life that people suffered. So they developed the Geneva Conventions in a bid to, structure or limit or, circumscribe what is permitted within the context of an armed conflict, of an international armed conflict. What should states do? What should they not do? What kind of weapons should they use? How should they conduct? It all has to do with the means and the method of warfare. And at the end of the day, like I said, if you look at all of these efforts, they are all tilted towards one direction: the preservation or the protection of what? Human dignity. And human dignity is at the core of every human rights conversation. Why should people not use certain weapons, biological weapons? Why shouldn't they use nuclear weapons? Why? If you ask yourself that question, you realize that it boils down to one thing: the protection of human life, of human dignity. If you look at the carnage suffered in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with the American use of the nuclear weapon till date, you would realize that there was a need for these laws to be put in place. So if I'm to comment a little bit more on the Declaration of the Rights of Man, this declaration set the groundwork for broader conversations on freedom of speech, The French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, introduced broader conversations, brought into play first generation rights, what I put in bracket the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which has to do with, all of these first generation rights. It has to introduce freedom of speech, freedom of expression, because back then, the conversations and the narrative changed in the world. People began to express themselves, ideas began to, take public stands, and people had to develop philosophies about life. But these things could not prevail if speech was proscribed, if speech was circumscribed just to a specific group of persons or under certain circumstances. The basic value introduced by the Declaration was that all men are born and remain free and equal in rights, which is specified as the rights to liberty, property, the inviolability of the person, and resistance to oppression. If you read these lines of all men being born free and equal, right, you will understand if you look at the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. It tells you clearly, all men are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience. And so they react towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. And you see that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, draw inspiration, draw allusion from a combination of all this history from 539, the Magna Carta of 1215, the English Bill of Rights, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, and then, conventions around the Geneva Conventions. These conventions set out, they set the stage for more intense conversations of human dignity, as it remained the focus of humanitarian actions in this era. All humanitarian actions, like when we talk about humanitarian actions, it comes in either within or after there is a conflict. Why are these efforts put in place? Even when these organizations carry out humanitarian actions, like in Cameroon, for instance, right now in the English-speaking regions, we have a plethora of international non-governmental organizations, from the UN, to the Danish Refugee Council, the Norwegian Refugee Council, different branches of the UN, OCHA, UNHCR, UNFPA, all of this, UNICEF, and all, as they are working, they are guided by what they call the humanitarian principles. And these humanitarian principles in the conduct of their humanitarian activity are all geared towards preserving human dignity. If you are told in the course of your activities to do no harm, which is a principle under humanitarian principles, you are not supposed to expose the people you're trying to help to more harm. Why? Because they are trying to preserve human life. They're trying to preserve human dignity. So the Second World War was the main catalyst to propel the concept and the terminology of human rights to the global stage. So after the Second World War, when states met and decided, after drafting, the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is where this whole term, human rights, then took public stance, then became public conversation and public use. It is after the Second World War. So now, after the Second World War, what were some of the developments that took place? Because we need to understand how human rights has, evolved over time. We had the 1945 UN Charter. The Charter then created the United Nations. The United Nations back then created a Commission of Human Rights headed by Eleanor Roosevelt that was charged, to bring together states from Africa, representatives from the global South America, which did a very fantastic job in coming up with 30 articles or declarations, which then is what we now know as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. From 1948 now, the Universal Declaration, like I mentioned earlier in its first article, it says all men are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They should react towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood because they're endowed with reason and conscience. That sets the groundwork for human rights conversations. Then we moved to the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. You know, when conflicts happen, people migrate, people move, people are trying to escape for their lives. You either qualify as an IDP, an internally displaced person, that is, you move within your territorial boundaries from one place to another, or you become a refugee in another country. Then we have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of 1966. You know, the first generation rights. You have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. We have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights of 1982. If you look at the dates that I try to outline, you see how these laws are coming at different points. You know, you had the Convention on Torture, against torture. You had the Convention on the Rights of a Child. Then we even have third and fourth generation human rights, you know, because there have been subsequent developments. So third generation rights will include the right to sustainable development. If you look, the UN established in, they established the Millennium Development Goals first, right? Which were all directed towards, you know, ensuring proper state development for a period of 10 to 15 years. Then from 2015 to 2030, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're 17 in number. These Sustainable Development Goals are guiding principles of the United Nations, right? That help shape state policies. All of these things, I would say, it still boils down to one thing. Why do states, why do these institutions create these principles, create these thresholds? Why? They are looking for ways to improve the quality of human life. And human life by itself is the foundation of human rights, as we have established earlier under the concept of human dignity. And we even have the right to peace. You know, people have the right to live in a peaceful environment. That is why we have the UN setting up in its chapter 6 and 7, Pacific measures towards conflict resolution. You know, negotiation, arbitration, mediation, good office. Those are Pacific measures. And if those measures fail, then they resort to the use of force under chapter 7 of the UN Charter. Why? Because there is a right for people to live in peaceful environment. You cannot enjoy, you cannot flourish as a person. You cannot enjoy your rights fully if you are living in a conflict-stricken setting. If there is an ongoing armed conflict, your rights are greatly circumscribed. Then fourth generation rights, such as the right to development, which is your right to participate in the social, economic, political, and cultural development. Every person has this right. So if I want to wrap up, so others can pick up, and then we can have a brief conversation after this. I would say in today's context, I would strongly argue that human rights remain the guiding principle, although the terminology is not so employed. From back then, we didn't have the conversations of human rights. All state policies, domestic and foreign, are somehow designed with human rights at the center. When a state designs its policies, its domestic policy, its foreign policy, they are all geared towards something. It may not have the wordings of human rights, but if you look at the core of these policies, is towards human rights. Corporations are compelled to carry out corporate social responsibility, corporate due diligence, environmental impact assessments for extractive companies, all in a bid to foster human dignity, right? There is increasing online security and protection because of human rights. We talk about the right to privacy and the right to human dignity. We have international, regional courts like the International Criminal Court, the African Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. We even have our local or national court systems, all directed towards protecting human dignity, human rights. The law prescribes certain conducts which it criminalizes because they are protecting human rights. If you take another person's life, the law says you are guilty of murder or manslaughter. You face charges, you get your penalty, you get your punishment because you are not supposed to do that. Once a state violates, or once a leader violates international law, violates international human rights law, violates international humanitarian law, his actions constitute an international crime, and he can then face prosecution at the level of the International Criminal Court. We also have a court in Africa for human rights violations. We have a court in the Americas, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the same in Europe. All of these things, all of these efforts. So in today's world, in today's time, in this 21st century, human rights is and will always remain relevant. It will always be at the backstage, at the background, or it will always take front or central place in all state and organizational conversations. So is there going to be a time, or will there be a time when human rights will cease to have relevance? Will there be a time when human rights will not be in the conversations, either directly or in the spirit of the conversations? If you ask me, I will give you an affirmative no. I will tell you, I'll give you an express no. Human rights will always be at the center of these conversations, at the center of these efforts by states, by institutions, by individuals. Even when you as an individual, you set up a scheme to support kids to go to school, it is still part of the human rights under the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So I would end here for now. If there are any questions, I will take them and I would yield the mic to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pontus, for your insightful presentation. I quite learned a lot, even though I have some knowledge on human rights, but you were able to relate human rights from its conception to the present society. In the way you explain them using examples from Africa as well as in America, and also with the present war that's going on in Ukraine. So this is really insightful, whereby everybody can relate to what human rights is all about. So thank you so much, and for your questions, we'll take them after everybody's presentation, so we can have opportunity for others to present. Okay, secondly, second presenter, we have Chebet Bisiri, and she's going to talk about refugees in Kenya, refugees protection rights in Kenya. So Chebet, you have 6 minutes to present, and all the best. Please, could you stop sharing your screen?
Is it okay now?
Chebet, are you there?
Oh, hello guys. Yes, I'm here. So sorry. I have to multitask because I'm at work and I haven't been given an off. So I hope you guys are okay. Nice to be here with you again. Just a second. All right. So I'm supposed to talk about refugees and the human rights of refugees. And what we can start about refugees is to define who these people are. So a refugee is a person who, owing a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, or membership of a particular social group, and or political opinion, and they're outside the country of their nationality, and they're unable to, because of maybe fear or yeah, they're unable to avail themselves for the protection of that country. So that means then that they feel rejected already. Like, when you're, like, you try and imagine this. You have had to move from your country because of unforeseen circumstances, and you have to look for a place to stay, and it's not your option where you finally find the place to stay. So you definitely feel that sense of rejection and sense of your self-worth reduces, because now if you're not no longer part of your country because of things that you did not decide, things that you did not choose, then definitely already you're feeling violated. So you can imagine that a lot of refugees are not protected. They're left, some die in the camps. Like in Kenya, we have two camps in the northern Kenya. They're called, it's Dadaab and Kakuma camp. And we have more than 500,000 refugees there. And so you find that the government, first of all, when a government cannot even sustain the needs of its own citizens, you can imagine how hard it is for the refugees of that country. So in Kenya, we have refugees in Dadaab camp. And when the COVID-19 pandemic came, it worsened the state of refugees. And a report by the United Nations Human Rights Commission reported that over 7,500 refugees would be moving back to their country in 2018. But in 2020, that number reduced to 200. So you find that, when you're a refugee somewhere, it means that you're not there to stay permanently. So in fact, they usually have tents that are not permanent, just for that period of time, an unknown period of time, but it's not permanent. So before 2018, about 7,500 refugees would go back to their country. In Kenya, we host refugees from Somalia and South Sudan. So in 2018, a report shows that 7,500 would go back, but right in 2020, and that is when the COVID-19 pandemic came, only 200 refugees would be able to go back to their country. And this is because there was rising violence and there was displacement and drought in either Somalia or South Sudan. Now, apart from those issues like violence and displacement and drought, you find that the COVID-19 pandemic brought about restrictions, travel restrictions, where flights were cancelled. You could not even move in my country, you could not move from town to town at some point. You had to be restricted to your own town. So you can imagine for refugees how harder it was. And apart from not receiving basic rights, now they can't even go back to their country, even if they wanted to. So it's a really tough thing to be a refugee, not just in Kenya, but also in Africa and in the entire world. So recently, our country, Kenya, they decided to close the camps. You can imagine how hard it will be for the refugees. So the camps are supposed to be closed in June 2022, this year. That's this year we're in March, June, April, May, June. So in 3 months, the camps are supposed to be closed. And the government and other organizations, donor organizations, are saying that these refugees, before we close the camps, they need to make sure that these refugees are well catered for. If not to give them jobs and give them permanent settlements, then there's no need for closing that camp. But the government and other stakeholders have insisted that they're closing the camps. And what I'm saying is that the plan that they have is to give jobs to those refugees, but that will only apply to the refugees who have qualifications, academic qualifications. What about those refugees who don't have academic qualifications? So it's going to be a difficult time for them. And that again we see is a violation of human rights, because as a human being you're entitled to basic needs like food, shelter, and clothing, and the government of the day is responsible for that. And I don't think if our government will be able to provide for the needs of these refugees in our country. um, so I think it is vital that refugees have uninterrupted access to humanitarian assistance throughout the camp closure process until they have certainly this known they have certainty about their future and can become self-reliant. But I don't think the government will give them that time and the humanitarian assistance that they all need. There is usually a shortage when it comes to offering help to not just refugees, but also the vulnerable people in our society. And for refugees, it becomes harder. Yeah. So I've tried to look up to see what other organizations are doing apart from the government. And the United Nations Refugee Agency says that persons who have been determined under an equitable procedure not to be in need of international protection are in a situation similar to that of illegal aliens and may be deported. So you see, again, being a refugee is just hectic because you have to also prove that you are a refugee. Uh, and then but however, the United Nations urges that protection should be granted to people who come from countries devastated by armed conflicts or generalized violence. Now, that is the UN. That is what the UN is saying. But the issue is what happens in the ground. What happens exactly on the ground? For us in the country, you know, we've been having a lot of Al-Shabaab attacks, terrorist attacks. And of course, there is a lot of stereotypes about on Muslims. And you'll find that, like I've said, we have refugees from South Sudan and Somalia. You find that majority of that population are Muslims. So basically, first of all, you're a refugee. That means you will have discrimination from the people of that country. Secondly, being a Muslim comes with stereotypes in our country because they tend to look at these people as, you know, terrorists and such like things. So being a refugee is actually a really huge difficulty as a human being. I think if there's anyone whose rights are violated, for me, is a refugee. Um, yeah, so what UNHCR, that is the United Nations Refugee Agency, does in our country, as refugees, especially the elderly women and children, are often, you know, they're the most vulnerable to violence and all the other things, the violations. Women and children are usually at a higher risk, no matter the situation, whether they are refugees or not. So you can imagine women who are refugees, it becomes worse for them. So, and I've seen some reports where the refugees are raped. Some of them are victims of gender violence from even not just from their spouses sometimes, because you see, according to research, conflict usually comes about when there's lack of resources like water, food, basic needs. You find that people start conflicting against each other. You find that a husband who cannot provide for his family, in this case, the refugees. Now you find a whole family that are refugees. You find a husband cannot be able to provide for his family. So he becomes frustrated. And let's say now the wife is like, hey, you're my husband. You need to provide for our family. We have 5 children here looking at us. They don't know where we are. They don't know where their next meal will come from. What are you doing as a husband? You're a useless man. And you find the husband will be agitated and will fight and will might end up beating the wife plus the children because of anger and frustrations, you know. And because you can imagine, as this man doesn't even know where he is, it's a foreign country, and then there's pressure here looking at him to provide for his family. So you find violations of human rights come from conflict, and also the fight for resources or the lack of resources, where you're frustrated, you don't know where you're getting your next meal. Who is to blame? So you find you'll start blaming maybe your children. You start saying, why did I even give birth? Or your wife maybe cannot understand, because even her, she's struggling. So you find that there's a lot of conflict when people lack basic needs and resources. Now, what the UN is doing about women, the United Nations United Nations Refugee Agency, they try and upgrade basic facilities such as lightings and walls and such things, try to give humanitarian food, humanitarian assistance, to encourage refugees to, at least feel like they're remembered and they're catered for. But now my issue is, for how long will refugees be refugees? Refugees should not be refugees forever. And you'll find that there are some refugees who have stayed, for example, in these camps in our country for more than 5, 6 years. They don't know where to go. They don't have where to go. So me, what I would recommend for governments and any stakeholders, when refugees, or any other country, when refugees come to your country, the countries need to have plans, of course with partnerships with international organizations. Have a plan. When refugees come, what do we do for them? Do we just leave them in those camps and keep taking the food to them there? Because at the end of the day, we all need a home, a place we can call home. And when you have a place, you are in a place you can't call home for such a long time, it becomes even hectic, and it also affects your mental health, not just your physical health. So I think governments and other stakeholders should put policies in plan for refugees, to ensure that refugees do not overstay in a place. For example, now I like this plan in our country, where they're saying they're closing the camps, but they are giving them permanent jobs. But there's a gap there, because they're not talking about not permanent jobs, but just jobs, and something to keep them, to help them have a house shelter that they can depend on, like shelter that they can no longer have to depend on someone for shelter, food where they cannot have to depend on someone for food, for the basic needs. As a human being also, it's not good to depend entirely on another person for your basic needs. So the government should put a plan where they're empowering these people. If a refugee comes there, they're not educated, can you be able to take them to a public school where they can learn and get education, so that they can be able to stand on their own, so that they can be independent? So that would be my recommendation to all these human rights agencies or refugee agencies and governments. Put a plan where you can only make the refugee depend on you for a short period of time, as you empower them to be able to depend on themselves, empower them to be able to make decisions on what next, and what is next for their lives. Do they want to move back to their country? Do they want to work in your country? Yeah, that is basically what I would say. I would have talked and talked more, but Pauline, allow me to end there. Yeah, thank you for the chance. And in case of any questions, you guys, you can feel free to ask me any questions you have, in case I've not talked, in case there's something I've not covered. Pauline.
Thank you so much, Kibet, for your presentation. With this presentation, you spoke about Kenya, and we are able to relate as Africans per se. And when you try to compare that with the crisis happening in Ukraine, how refugees are being treated, the humanitarian assistance, the rapid response to give to them. Then you ask about what's happening in Kenya, what's needed to be done with all the crisis happening, all the conflict happening within the neighboring countries, and individuals are able to come together just to support this crisis that happened in Ukraine. So thank you so much, Yubet. So after everybody's presentation, I'm gonna ask you questions about Kenya, about the refugees, and thank you also for your recommendations. You know, government they always do their best to write down policies, but the most difficult things about implementations are people
Exactly.
willing to accept this change? Are they willing to cooperate with the government? What about the institution? What about the organizations, the local organizations and the international organizations? The international organizations are good and giving funds. What about the local organizations? They are going to the field. Are the resources enough? Are the people cooperating enough? So after everyone's presentation, I'm going to ask some few questions concerning that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pauline.
So we have the next presenter, which is Faustin. We want to talk about the IDPs, the violations and the rights. So Faustin, please could you write on? Thank you. Unmute yourself, Faustin.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for giving me the floor, Madame de Mojo. And believe me, I'm learning a lot. I've learned a lot from the presenters who just did an insightful presentation. I learned a lot, and I am going to see how to apply them to my own area of domain, area of influence. Thank you again. So I am Fonye 14. I am managing a program for vulnerable internally displaced persons at Bonaberi, Douala. Douala is within Cameroon. So I will talk in a nutshell about IDPs and then conclude with vulnerable IDPs in Bonaberi, Douala. So I'll begin with the definition of an IDP. An IDP is someone who has left or forcefully left his area of origin or area of residence due to one reason or the other and moved to another region. They will call it host region to search for better living conditions within the same territory. That's within the same national territory. That is what they call an IDP, an internally displaced person. And so, looking at our context in Cameroon today, we've seen that as a result of the Anglophone crisis, many people have migrated or left the Northwest and Southwest regions and have settled, forcefully settled in other host communities, host regions, apart from their area of origin. And you see that their conditions of living there are really precarious. I don't know if you all are getting me. And their conditions of living are really precarious. And so most of the times they are abandoned to themselves. And so to link now my topic to human rights violation, I'll begin by first of all defining human rights according to the United Nations. There are standards that recognizes and protect the dignity of all human beings, regardless of their sex, age, and gender. There are several types of rights, several types of human rights. You have economic rights, social rights, cultural rights, and civil rights. But I'm going to lay emphasis on on three: economic rights, social rights, and civil rights. Economic rights, what does that mean? It simply means that you have the right to production, have access to lands, cultivable lands, have access to income, which will permit you to generate revenues for your households. That is economic. We are in the context of IDPs. And so I'll be talking much in particular about the vulnerable IDPs, because we've discovered that it is 5 years now since we have the crisis in Cameroon, and we've discovered that a minority of them who migrated or left their areas of origin and within the host communities are no longer vulnerable, And so our area of focus will be those who are still vulnerable. Imagine someone, for instance, who was a farmer, and today he has nothing doing. Imagine a lady who owned a hairdressing salon and was employing more than 20 persons, and today she has nothing doing. You see, those are the indicators which will permit you to see that this person is really vulnerable. And so our area of focus will be so really vulnerable. And so to continue looking at the civil rights, that is, you have access to official documents, that is birth certificates, national ID cards. And when you don't have access to such documents, it means your rights are being violated. We have many of them who left their regions and are here today. They do not have documents, official documents. They do not have national ID cards, birth certificates, marriage certificates. And so as a result of that, they can't acquire new statuses in their society, in their whole society. And that is a problem. And even to afford for those certificates, within your host community, it is still a problem because it is expensive. You can't afford them. It is a violation of that right, of their civil right. And so when we look at the social right of these vulnerable IDPs, they do not have access to cultivable lands. That is still a problem. They are being marginalized in the society. A lot of marginalization, be it in the domain of housing, be it in the domain of education, be it in the domain of clothing, they are being marginalized. And so that is still a problem. Meaning their rights are being violated in the domain of the social aspect. It is still a problem. So as I earlier said, I just wanted to brief you on those 3 points on human rights, that is economic, social, and civil. I'll also continue to say that several treaties were being signed on human rights immediately after the Second World War, not to expatiate on what my colleague just spoke about. I'll lay emphasis just on one, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It will come back to just relate to what I just said. If you don't have housing facilities, educational facilities, health facilities, it means your rights are being violated. And looking at the context of vulnerable internally displaced persons, their rights are being violated. That is why we need advocates. Advocates are there to see how we could advocate for better living conditions, better rights to favor them, better policies put in place to favor them. And so let me come now to our context in Douala. I don't know if I've spoken in a nutshell of Cameroon. Now let me come to the context of Douala, precisely Bonaberi. Bonaberi is within the Douala 4 Council. And so you discover that there are a vast majority of them, Bonaberi, because there are a vast majority of those who left the Northwest and Southwest are based in Bonaberi. And so because of its proximity, there are a lot of them living here for 5 years now who have been abandoned to themselves. I would like to talk with facts and figures. I am managing a program. We are now legalizing the documents, which will soon become an association on its own, called Lodge and IDP. Lodge and IDP has been doing a lot for these vulnerable internally displaced persons. As earlier said, I'll be talking muchly on vulnerable internally displaced persons. We have been trying to execute some priority projects for them in the domain of education, health, food security and livelihood, child protection, gender-related issues. All these problems I'm evoking is in line with the protection sector, with the protection rights, because their rights are being strangled upon within this protection sector. That is why there is a need to provide assistance to them based on these sectors I just evoked. And so we first of all conducted a 26-day census, which covered all neighborhoods at Bonaberry, Douala, identifying these vulnerable persons. The strategy we used was a door-to-door approach, meaning we went door to door, identifying all IDP households at Bonaberry, Douala, identifying their multi-sectoral needs, taking into consideration their talents and capabilities. You know, most of them have left their areas of origins and are here. They want to do something. They want to do something, but they do not have the means. That is why it is important to go back to meet them, talk with them, try to know what they want to do. Our objective is to see how they can be autonomous within their host communities. It is true, it is still a long battle because for 5 years now, believe me, there have not been a lot of assistance for them, given the fact that some UN organizations do not intervene in urban areas. Yes, we have tried to advocate for that, and we've seen that some UN organizations do not intervene in urban areas. That is why it is still a problem for us to mobilize resources to assist these persons. But we are still doing our best to see how we could come to their aid, especially with the fact that their rights are being violated in all these sectors I just evoked. So after this, the census we conducted, the 26-day census we conducted, we identified 2,112 IDP, vulnerable IDP households at Bonaberry, Douala. We had to discard 110 of these IDP households because we discovered that they were no longer vulnerable. Given the information they gave us, they were no longer vulnerable. And we are going in for those who are really vulnerable. We had to also discard 30 of these households because of incomplete information, giving us a total of 1,932 vulnerable internally displaced households at Bonaberry, Douala. And after the sorting, the data entry and sorting, we had to identify 7,886 other vulnerable IDP occupants living with the 1,982, making a total of 9,816 vulnerable internally displaced persons at Bonaberry, Douala. The figures are huge, but believe me, we still have a lot of work to do here. Because what is being done in other regions, for instance, in other conflict-affected regions, host regions, they are fine. They are fine because you have a couple of UN organizations already intervening, refugee organizations already intervening. But the problem here now is that those in the urban settings still have a problem. They are victims of circumstances, it's true, but they are still being abandoned to themselves. That is why we are calling, Lodge and IDP is calling on other civil society organizations, men and women of goodwill, to see how we could, why not, raise back to hope the rights of these vulnerable internally displaced persons who are, of course, as I repeat, abandoned to themselves and living in precarious conditions. And so from the data we produced, we are already designing priority projects for execution. These projects will be based in the domain of child protection and education. As I earlier said, in the protection sector. The protection sector simply means in the right to cover their protection needs, their needs in the domain of protection. And so we are going to look at their child protection and education. We are going to look at gender-related issues, come up with projects in that domain. We are going to as well come up with projects in the domain of health, because we discovered that there are a lot of unwanted pregnancies. As a result of that, we have to do a lot of sensitizations on family planning or the like. So we are also as well going to come up with livelihood projects. Remember, from the statistics we produced, more than 1,172 of the IDP households, vulnerable IDP households we identified, 98% of them are in need of income generating activities. Are in need of income generating activities. It means there is a real problem. There is a problem. They can't have access to their economic rights, and it is a problem. That is why we have to provide for them sustainable intervention. Remember, if they can take care of themselves, they can take care of their families, provide school fees, school equipment, didactic materials for their children, meaning they are fine economically. And so that is why we have to come together as a collective to see how we could provide assistance to these persons in the domain of livelihood in particular. So in a nutshell, I evoked the aspect of IDPs. First of all, definition of IDPs. IDPs in Cameroon, vulnerable, internally displaced. Then making the dichotomy between vulnerable IDPs and IDPs itself, and then looking at the context of Cameroon, and particularly looking at the case study of Bonaberi Douala. So I think that is all I have to say, Madame the Moderator, with regards to vulnerable, internally displaced persons in Cameroon, with particular note those at Bonaberi Douala. And believe me, they are really abandoned to themselves. And we are trying to do our best to see how we could advocate for better living conditions, for their rights to be restored. But we can't do that alone. We need other civil society organizations, potential men and women of goodwill to assist us. So together we can do something. Thank you. And I'm open to suggestions or questions as well. Thank you. I give you back the floor, Madame the Moderator.
Thank you so much, Fonyo Faustin, for your presentation. I really enjoy the fact that you work within a society, within a community, which is Douala Bonaberi, and you have recorded like 1,000 refugees. That's really a number. And the problems we have identified about the children, education, resources, as well as the socio-economic empowerment of these IDPs. IDPs are individuals whereby they are forced to leave their present environment to move to another environment, even though they are still in the same society, in the same country, but they have to leave their homes. And it affects them psychologically, how they have to adopt, how they have to be accepted in the society in this area. So thank you so much, Faustin, for your presentation. So after the presentations of all the speakers, they will ask you questions. So the next person is Mulu Quinty. We talk about the violations of women. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Mulung Kweti in Yaoundé, volunteer at Wem'Afrika, and I'm going to be talking about the violations of women's rights. I hope everyone can hear me. If you cannot hear me, just indicate and I'll try to move to where I can get better reception. Thank you. Yeah, as we all adopted in 1948, it was meant to further cement the rights of human beings, and with core concepts like equality and equity. That's equal rights between all humans, irrespective of their political orientation, sex, religion, and all that. So, I'm getting a complaint that my connection is not stable. I don't know. Give me a minute, please. Let me find better reception. Like I was saying, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was meant to make sure that all humans enjoy equal rights. But I don't know, has anyone, I'm sure you are all familiar with what the social contract is. The social contract is a contract which was entered by humans when the state was born, where we surrender our rights under the state, which becomes the guarantor of the common good. Can you see me and hear me now clearly? Okay. So, yes, so the state to which we surrendered our rights is supposed to be the guarantor of equality between men and women, because men and women surrendered equal rights to this state. So where your rights end is where another person's rights begin. So how did it come about that men and women who surrendered the same amount of rights, men get to enjoy better rights than these women? How did that come about? We surrendered equal rights. How come others get to enjoy more than others? So we're able to identify some of these areas where women's rights are violated, and I'll give them here, but I'll be calling a few numbers. You hear a lot of numbers and statistics, but I don't want you to look at this as just numbers. I want that when you hear a number, no matter how large it is, no matter how many million it is, just know that each of that number, each digit in that number represents a life, represents a woman, represents a family that has been torn apart, or that has been destroyed, or that will never be the same again because of one or more of these violations. I'll begin with the physical and sexual violence which women have to endure. UN Women has that about 736 women in the world, that's women aged between 15 years and older, in their lifetime experience sexual or physical violence. You get that number, 733 million. So in that 733 million, think of every single person in this number who gets to witness, who gets to endure an act of sexual or physical violence in their lifetime. Those are people's families, those are people's daughters, those are people's sisters, people's mothers, whose lives will never be the same again. And it also has that about 40% of these women in South Africa, in particular, are going to be raped in their lifetime. So where does Africa come about to get such a large number? How does an African country feature in such statistics? We're going to come to all of that eventually. Another sector which is also very common, where the violation of women's rights is also very common, is education. In the sector of education, it's not today we'll begin to hear about enrollment rates in schools, how there's always the predominance of men. There are always more boys enrolled in school. You enter any classroom, it's often very common to find more boys than girls. Where do all these come from? All these come from gender roles which are culturally enshrined in our societies. In our societies, right from the base unit of our society, that's in the family, there's always this little bias that plays along and favors this condition of female underrepresentation, this female deprivation of rights like this in a family. If a situation had to arise where maybe due to financial difficulties or whatever, they cannot educate every child of the family, it's always going to be the male child that is going to be educated. That is for a fact. I don't know if anybody who is going to be able to dispute that, but it is noted that the male child is going to always be more favored, and this has led to a condition whereby 81% of males are educated against 69% in Cameroon. Look at that disparity. 81% literacy rate in men compared to 69% in women. All these they're born from the basic unit of our society, in the family. So there's this platform, the Global Education Monitoring Team, which does these reports on the situation of education. So they've studied this, the rate at which this situation is being improved. It's actually improving quite right from the 1990s till what we have today. We see that more girls are are being enrolled in schools, but the rate is not very encouraging. If you can, from what I gathered from this global education monitoring team, it shows that at this rate we might only be able to get all these girls into school by the year 2050. Just here, 2050. So as they usually say when fighting for women's rights, we always use this term, we would like to see equality in our lifetime. So we don't know if 2050 is in all of us our lifetimes, but it's just to let us know that there's a problem there, that we're not working as fast as possible to get the situation remedied. Another area where women also find a lot of discrimination, where there's bias, where women are affected by an uncomfortable situation, is the area of human trafficking. Human trafficking today is a very, very lucrative industry which is run by drug lords and all that, and right up to government. We've heard of scandals where administrative personnel are involved in human trafficking rings and all that. And women still tend to be the most vulnerable. Why are women the most vulnerable? Women don't often have the physical strength to resist the attacks where they are kidnapped and forced into this industry, and they are also more targeted because they can be easily exploited for sexual favors and all that. And it's a very uncomfortable situation that women are 72% of the victims of these human trafficking rings are often women. It indicates that, and that also indicates that 4 out of 5 of these women that are trafficked are used for exploited sexually. So can you imagine? That's, I don't know if you are understanding the numbers I'm talking about. I'm saying that maybe in 100 people, 72 of those people are going that are trafficked. In a ring of 100 kidnapped people that are going to be trafficked, 72 of them are women. 72 are women. And then for every, let's say for every 10 of those women, 8 of them are going to be exploited sexually. Is that the kind of figures that we're supposed to be hearing about in the year 2022? That's the question we're supposed to ask ourselves. Okay, we'll move forward to one problem which is as old as time itself, especially in African societies: female genital mutilation. If I'm too fast, you can stop me at any time to get me to slow down. Thank you. Female genital mutilation, that has existed as long as African societies have existed. If you have never heard about it, in fact, not everybody has heard about it, but I'll still try to define it in my own words. Is the process by which a part of the female reproductive organ is cut for either cultural or traditional rituals, as common in African traditional practices. Yes, that is a very rampant situation in Africa these days. It's a very serious violation of human rights, because it's not only about the physical torture which it entails. There's psychological torture also. Can you imagine being exposed to such a situation at a very young age? Because it is noted that even before the age of 5, most African girls have already endured such a condition. So talk about at least 200 million girls between the ages of 15 to 49 have undergone this situation. I'm not a girl, I don't know how it feels. Nobody can ever pretend to know how it feels, but let us just put ourselves in their shoes to think that up to today, they still have to suffer, women still have to suffer from such a predicament. In fact, it's a very terrible situation. The health risk involved in such an activity, can you just imagine? Because the sanity conditions under which these rights are performed, it's not, they're never the best. You can never, I don't have anything good to say about the entire activity. Nobody has anything good to say about the entire activity. So the abolition of such things is supposed to take priority in our endeavors to get a more egalitarian society for men and women. And also we have another uncomfortable situation of the woman is child marriages. Like I said, I was going to talk about violations of women. Child marriages. Child marriage is a very big violation of the rights of the woman. You have the right to choice. The right to choice. You have to choose a partner for yourself. Even though in our societies, adults still face this situation, but that is not what we're talking about. So today we're talking about children. A girl child before the age of 18 being forced into marriage to someone she might never have met. I cannot even begin to imagine. It's a very terrible situation. hmm So for the numbers, I'll say 650 million. 650 million women who are alive today were married before the age of 18. That's before your 18th birthday, they were married. That's another of those large numbers that we should take note of. 650 women. So don't just take it as a number. Think of 650 women out there today that are living in unhappy marriages because they were forced into it. It's quite something, isn't it? 650 million women are alive today living in an uncomfortable situation which they had no say over. The parents who do this, I don't know. Sometimes our culture, they say we have to defend our culture and all that, but some customary practices are just unbearable. They have to be looked into. They have to be looked into. The fact that it has been the norm for a number of years. In fact, since our coming together as a society, things like this have existed. But the fact that they existed does not mean that they're okay. As we evolve, we're supposed to rethink some of these things that we have been doing. We're supposed to rethink them. Some people will say it's the white man and civilization trying to erase our own practices, but we as human beings are supposed to evolve regardless of our race. You cannot tell me that, well, yeah, it's true that these child marriages are also common in places like India, and I'll not say Indians are whites or blacks, but regardless of the race, we know that these things are common in Africa. Why should Africans be the most reluctant to evolve? We have to evolve. We have to evolve. 650 million girls sent off into early marriages, and it's something that we have to look into. So after gathering these numbers, I thought it wise that I could recommend at least one way in which these situations could be remedied. Excuse me. Our lawmakers need to take into consideration that these violent crimes, and even the non-violent ones that are perpetrated against women, are supposed to be enshrined in our legislation. That is, we're supposed to be tougher on crimes like this, because if you attend some of the court proceedings where someone is being tried for sexual crimes and all that, you see that they always have something to say in their defense. Maybe the defense attorney is going to be pleading for a lower sentence and something like maybe based on excuse me, they'll try to make a plea. They try to make a plea that the perpetrator is experiencing maybe physical or I'm talking about psychological damage. But yeah, in as much as we're supposed to recognize that the perpetrators might not have been in his right state of mind at the time when the act was committed, we are not supposed to take it lightly, because that will only further encourage the perpetrators of these acts. So the law is supposed to be very strict on punishing sexual crimes. There is no compromise to be made there. There is no compromise to be made there. Sexual crimes are supposed to be punished to the full extent of the law. No negotiation, no compromise, no concessions are going to be made concerning sexual. Well, for my part, I would say no concessions are supposed to be made. In the domain of education too, there's always more that we can do. There's always more that we can do in the family to to remedy the situation. We can always do more. We should encourage families to send their daughters to school. We should do that. And it's not only about encouraging them. The state itself is supposed to put in place measures that favor these things. Because in in I did a study a while ago trying to account for why this disparity in education. You see that even some of the girl children are undermotivated to go to school just because even at the level of house chores in the house, they have been made, they have been conditioned to believe that the boy child is more dominant, and even in the classroom, the boy child is going to dominate them. So they don't have they're not motivated to take part in academic activities. Something that has to be worked on and to get more of these girls to be free in an academic milieu. And as concerns human trafficking is not only a crime against women, but it's a crime against mankind on the whole. Trafficking a human being, restraining him, tying tying somebody up with ropes, that's violation of a human being's right to freedom. So actually a big security threat which has to be tackled. And now, as a recommendation, I think we need to do more to step up security of ports, because most of the time when these people are captured, they are very rarely used in the area where they are captured because they couldn't be recognized and things like that. So they are often, excuse me, it's very windy where I am. They are often smuggled out of the country across state lines, across international borders, and all that, sent far away to serve the purpose for which they were captured. So if we can tighten our security, implement more security measures at these exit points, the seaports, airports, and all that, then we'll say that we have taken a step towards remedying the situation of human trafficking. And as concerns female genital mutilation, I don't think there's anything like little steps that need to be taken in that domain. I'm talking about big steps. I'm talking about huge steps. Like it should be done once and for all. It should be outlawed. The practice should be abolished, and no compromise should be made. We're not talking about negotiating at what age. It's not something to negotiate. The practice should be abolished, because apart from being psychologically damaging, it is barbaric. It is barbaric that as a race, the human race who think it necessary for whatsoever reason to pick up a sharp object and go cutting parts of another human being. It's barbaric. It has to be abolished. And the reason for the prevalence of such a practice is mainly because, like I said, it's very common in rural areas. These areas will never have commissions that follow up to make sure that these things are actually being done. Because some people, you talk to them about it, they'll say, no, it's not possible. This thing cannot exist up to today. These things exist. They exist up to today. But some people will never know that they exist. Why? Because they are being carried out in the interiors, and girls are suffering in the interiors, and there's nobody to check to see that these things being are being implemented. So we need like some sort of decentralization of services, where local authorities themselves are charged and given the necessary tools to investigate, to make sure that these practices are actually abolished, and children are not suffering from situations like this. Same thing goes for child marriages. Commission should be set up to make sure that girls are not exploited this way, because as for a marriage to be legal, it needs to be take to it needs to there needs to be some signing in the courts, as well as in front of a civil status registrar. I don't know if that's the case for all countries. I'm talking about Cameroon in particular. It needs to be signed in front of a civil status registrar, in most cases the mayor. So before any of such is done, it needs to be we need to hear from both parties to make sure that both parties are of age and have accepted that they are going to take upon this engagement to become a couple. And so this marriage, but of course, traditional societies, people will always send their children off to marriages without meeting these authorities, and those are the things that need to be investigated. And the population also needs to be sensitized, because these things don't happen in the dark. They happen in our society. We see them happening, and some people like to say they will mind their business. You don't sit and mind your business when a child is being exploited. A child, a 16-year-old child, 15, 10-year-old children being sent into marriage, and you sit minding your business. You don't do that. The population needs to be sensitized to speak out when they see these things happening, because of course the administration cannot handle it on its own. So we need the population to be sensitized to speak out, and by so doing, I believe that the situation is going to become better. Our society is going to work better if we all just come together and see how we can improve the condition of the girl child. Thank you, moderators. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mulu. Okay. Thank you, Mulu, for your presentation. And you know how relevant your presentation is? This month is the month for women, where 8th of March was a month celebrated for International Women's Day, women's rights, whereby this issue has spoken about the female genital mutilations, the child marriages, trafficking. You could see that all of this is tied along with cultural. It's linked with cultural, and it's now becoming part of the women to accept pain because it's cultural. I, as a woman, I talk because one way or the other I have experienced part of it, but I am educated now, so it's my duty as well, as I explained for you as your recommendation, that let's not stay quiet because it's not our business, because it doesn't affect us directly. We have to express ourselves, we have to show our consent to other people who are being violated. So thank you so much, Muri, for your presentation. I'm going to answer a few questions after the next presenter gives his presentation. So Hansen, please, could you present on your topic on slavery?
Hello everyone, I'm Hansen, and I'll be presenting on the topic slavery, violations, and impacts. Yeah, so as we all know, slavery is a situation whereby someone is put without payment, or some maybe sexually exploited. Like we also have like other past history, we see slaves working in big farms or being worked by a master. So these slaveholders, as they call them, obviously were using these people for profit making. So for my presentation, I will start by talking about the causes of slavery, the various types of causes of slavery. And in this case, the word slavery is due to vulnerability. And most often than not, poverty alone does not really explain slavery, because, I mean, we could see back in history when the Europeans came and had some of the Black Americans' ancestors as slaves. This was not because they were poor, but rather there are some special vulnerabilities that make someone have a poor mentality or could be associated to poor people. And this makes you to become enslaved by yourself. So talking about the causes of slavery, we could see like there's always the area of lack of awareness of right and risk. Even in this generation, many people are still not aware of many things happening around them, and they are in another way, slaves to something. So often people do not even know their right and accept forced labor and exploitation. A good example of this could be people in debt who may wrongly believe that money lending has the right to hold them as servants until the debt is being paid. But the schemes of traffickers, let's say for those who deal in slave trafficking, it sounds attractive, and the risk of certain acts of such acts, like surrendering one's passport, we could see them happening every day in, let's say, for example, Lebanon. Some people even still face this in Dubai. Is not well understood. But this is also like a form of slavery and of enslaving someone. And also the absence of weak protective organizations opens people up to slavery. Let's say, for example, Wem'Afrika has like this very great initiative to bring out this knowledge, to sensitize people about these things. This is what we need, because many organizations who don't deal with these, in return, they don't enlighten people about even enslaving themselves. So poor communities often lack effective local organizations that work on such things. And such organizations can serve as protectors against acts of enslavement. Also, we could have absence of critical services. So some people tend to uh, exploitative money lenders in the absence of a legitimate source of credit. And with this, they end up being very vulnerable to their money lenders. In return, they become slaves. Health crisis too as well can drive people into this debt and automatically makes them slaves. So there's also another cause where we could say inadequate legal protection by the law. Yeah, so poor and marginalized groups and communities are the least likely to be protected by the law. We could see this happening back in many third world countries. We could see even in the case of Cameroon very clearly. So weak laws and lack of law enforcement reduce the risk to slavers and traffickers. Another good cause is the survivor vulnerability. Here, the survivors of slavery are often traumatized. They have perceived or seen the real dependence on their traffickers, and they are impoverished as well, and sometimes without a marketable skills. Um, these people are often frequently stigmatized, especially women and girls who have been victims of slave trafficking. And survivors are at high risk of becoming re-enslaved because of the mind, the trouble they go through from the past experiences. So what does slavery actually look like? Many a times people look at slavery in the concept or in the aspect of it, maybe what we watch in the Hollywood movies where they work in big farms and maybe they are being forced into labor. Some are used as sex slaves, yeah. To a greater extent, that is how it looks like. But most often, it is also a debt bondage because you are bonded to labor. This is like you are working off to pay a loan. You are enslaving yourself. Also, we have situations of contract slavery, where workers are deceived into slavery through the use of false employment contracts. And there are some terms and conditions in these contracts that you don't read them, there are even some policies they just put in a lot of junks, and you don't have that patience to go through. And when you want to violate or go against these contracts, you are now put into a serious situation whereby the law faces you so hard because you didn't even see them in this your employment contract. So slaveholders create contracts to lure individuals with promises of employment, yet once they arrive at the workplace, they are forced to maybe work for no pay, or cannot even escape because maybe one thing or the other has been tied to them and they have to work. This happens a lot in these countries where we see our youth running to get money or to work for money. Cases like Dubai, Qatar, Lebanon. I have history of people who have actually been victimized in these countries. So we also have the very prominent one, which is sex trafficking. I would say maybe we all know about that. Sex trafficking also is really prominent in the aspect of slavery. So in this situation, we can say it's when an adult engages in commercial sex act, such as prostitution, as a result of force, fraud, threat, or coins, or maybe the concern of the victim is not relevant. If threat or force has been applied, the act cannot be consensual. There's also child sex trafficking that actually differs from adult sex trafficking. In this situation now, children are the ones exposed to this act. Also, when we look at slavery, we will also see that there is another form of it, such as early marriage, where we have young girls forced into marriage against their will. And in this case, you see, most of the times in the past, I don't know if it still happens now, but most often families will use this to pay off their debt. And this is very bad. And it's a sad story. For victims like these, the children go to a lot just to, to pay off debt of something they know nothing about. So there's also this of domestic servitude, where the household workers, such as maids, are not permitted to leave the household or in their working environment. They are being forced to stay there. They typically actually receive little or no pay. This often happens in most homes. But how are these different types carried out? They are carried out by different kind of people, if we say, different kind of slave masters. It's not only the ones that were carried in the maybe in the history we read of in the past, where they were carried the transatlantic slave trade also. But these ones happen even in recent times. So there's also like a form of slavery where we have forced labor, child labor. This one is geared towards children. And this situation is more geared towards where children are held in forced labor, engaged maybe at times, female, like girls, young girls, engaged into prostitution, or worst of all, even pornography, acting these pornography movies, and they can't do anything about it because they are forced to. And some, they are even threatened with their lives. So they have to. That's another very sad form of slavery. So that looks very bad when you look at how does slavery looks like. It's a really bad situation where you see young people being forced into pornography or prostitution as a form of slavery. Child soldier too, when you talk of war times, is also a very prominent part of slavery, where children are being forced and persuaded to become soldiers to engage in combat. And this actually in violations of international norms. International norms actually forbid this action, but it's always been carried out in every conflict. You hear child shoulder here, there, and yeah. I will go further by trying to bring out the industries where slavery is more prevalent. So when you look at it according to the International Labor Organization, about a fifth of slavery is sexual slavery or forced prostitution. Another 10%, as the record states, could be consist of government slavery, in which the legal system is abused to extract forced labor from citizens so that the state or agents of the state can derive profit. But most slavery occurs in seemingly ordinary businesses, farm, mines. You could see that in Congo, fish boats, construction, domestic servants, textile and carpet factories, and even restaurants. Slavery is found where the goods services are heavily dependent on manual labor. That is where we really find slavery. Um, when talking about slavery, what do we think? Do we think we could stop this? How can slavery be stopped? This is the question that keeps going on in our minds. Because even in Mauritania, they still practice slavery. It's rare to see someone, and it's an African country. Slavery is not only about the Western world, but it's more also in the African countries. But these minor aspects of slavery are rarely looked into. So how can we stop this? The key to stopping slavery is helping the vulnerable communities and people to acquire the assets and tools that will overcome their vulnerability. As I earlier said, a slave is someone who is really vulnerable. And once you're vulnerable, you can't defend yourself, you can't protect yourself. So all free the slaves program was a program that began with the contextual research that was to define the vulnerability and pathways of leading the slavery and balancing up with the intervention strategies. And based on this research, actually, there was an adoption of some basic strategies like capacity building, which Wem'Afrika is much more into. And this will be dealing with protecting or providing trainings and techniques that will assist strengthen the local organizations and agencies to achieve sustainable solutions. Also, we have the educating and organizing vulnerable communities. As well, this also will be more focused on their rights and the risks of trafficking. Like I said, the example of Congo, where they have a lot of diamond and they are being extracted and they use forced labor to extract these resources. Also, we could say increasing access to basic services. If basic access to basic services are improved upon, it will help these communities, especially to mobilize communities to advocate for schools. Once they are educated, it will help them to know the norms, the good and the bad of these things. And also legal protection is a very, very vital point. Legal protection and liberation, that is to advocate for better laws and improve law enforcement. Maybe by training the policemen and also some government officials to know how to push these things out to the people so they could better report the ills of slavery, no matter what type of slavery it is. And also the last point I will talk on is reducing survivors' vulnerability. We help survivors to gain access, like helping them to gain access to medical care, counseling. These counseling sessions will actually really help them to go overcome their trauma because they've been victims and they know what they have been through. Some even find it difficult to sleep at night because of the trauma. So this could also be done by supporting groups, by introducing supporting groups, vocational training, keep them occupied, and also employment. With these essential services, I think the vulnerability of these survivors who can go back into being re-enslaved will be reduced. So with this, I will close my presentation and will be open for questions during the question session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hansen. It was really a nice presentation whereby I could just think through what you were saying, especially the area of lack of awareness. Many individuals they don't have the awareness that they are being exploited. And when we use the phrase they are slaves, they get annoyed and they feel bad using the word slave. When but they are slaves either when they cannot pay their debts, sexually exploited, trafficking, child marriages. It's quite an issue whereby people think slavery is just when you put on chains, where you put in chains and put them into boats to go and have forced labor. But there are different ways and methods whereby the practice is being practiced, slavery is being practiced. So in this 21st century, in this 21st century, individuals are growing to be financially independent, whereby they can stand on their own. But what about the other aspect in terms of the child marriages, in terms of those living in the rural communities? What about internet slavery? What about exploitation of women? So there are many other areas whereby this new form of slavery is causing a lot of lack of awareness to these individuals, and this limits the way we have to express ourselves. As organizations, as you earlier explained, with the various organizations, how they do their best to create more awareness to the public, more awareness of what is needed to be done. So thank you so much, Hansen, for this your presentation. She's gonna go a very long way to us. So now we are open to questions. We are open to questions. We have to have a presentation on protection of law, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, so we're gonna move ahead with questions. Please feel free to ask questions to the various presenters, and we're gonna conclude. Thank you. Yes, Faustin, please can you ask your question? Unmute yourself, please.
Before I go to the question, I'll first of all like to thank the other two presenters for the great. It was quite edifying. And so before I go again to my questions, I have a suggestion to make. One suggestion to make. I'll be suggesting that, Madam the moderator, you see how we could organize such presentation again, because the problem we have in our context today is lack of sensitization. People are not aware of what is happening around. And looking at the topics which you shared with me, it was quite really interesting. And so I think that I'll be proposing, I don't know what the others will think, that next time, before we organize such an event like this, we come up with maybe some flyers, maybe 1 month before, so that we maybe share. And also organizations intervening in such domains like maybe human rights, on humanitarian intervention may want to attend as well, So I'll be suggesting that next time we see how we could re-strategize so that we could increase not only the participant. Participant is not my problem because what matters with me is quality, not quantity. So I think that we have to work on that next time, please. Okay, let me go now to my question. I'll be talking to Mr. Mulukwenti. Mulukwenti. He spoke on he exchanged brilliantly on female genital mutilation. I don't know if he's around. I would just first of all want to thank him for what he
I
said.
can hear you.
Yes. Thank you so much for what you said. And to say that a lot of work has been done or is going on. Because look, from the study or from the census we conducted, we never recorded cases of female genital mutilation in the littoral. But be rest assured, a lot of work is being done in the northern regions, the far north regions, and the extreme north by these UN organizations, especially those intervening in the domain of women. For instance, the Plan Cameroon, the UNFPA, the GIZ, and then some corporate ambassadors, yes, like the French ambassador. What they are doing too in the north is that they are using an inclusive methodology. That's an inclusive approach. Those who are fighting this strategies of female genital mutilation in communities are the community leaders. And so they are doing a lot of work on that domain to see to it that this aspect of this female genital mutilation is being mitigated. It's being mitigated because it is mostly practiced in these Muslim regions. Looking at our context, Cameroon, it is mostly being practiced in these Muslim regions. And so a lot of work is being done there to see into it that the context of female genital mutilation is being taken away. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just don't want us to ever sit at some point and be content that enough has been done. Meanwhile, there is one girl somewhere who still undergoes this situation. So I want us to be as meticulous as possible. That's what I'm talking about.
Maybe you never heard me well. I never said all.
No, I heard you. I heard you. Yeah.
Okay.
I heard you.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
So we should never relent our efforts till no girl can ever suffer from such again.
That's true. Then
Yes.
I have one point. I have one point to give to Mr. Hansel on slavery. Thank you so much for that brilliant presentation on slavery. I learned a lot, but I have one recommendation to make on that. I don't know if it's around as well.
Yeah, I'm around. Yeah.
Okay. I will be suggesting that you try to your organization, because you gave an expose of what your organization is doing. I think congratulations for the good job you guys are doing or are planning to do. I think you have to liaise with, for instance, the military forces, for instance, the Ministry of Defense, and then propose to them your project for the military. It will be accepted, because for the little experience I know, that few people who are doing concrete work on to sensitize the military on peacekeeping and then trafficking. I think you should work on that, because your project can be accepted as well. Also, I want you to try to see how you can liaise connections with the British High Commission, because they sponsor such initiatives. So I think those are the two recommendations I have for you, because you evoked some key points which are really important. So I'll work that you should work on those 2 points. So thank you, Madam the Moderator. Those are some what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin.
Voting for the recommendations too as well. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Welcome.
Austin, thank you so much for your questions and recommendations. And what we do at Wem'Afrika is that monthly we have meetings like these events. Last month we had a meeting on female genital mutilations. In that meeting, we realized that it's still being practiced. it's still being practiced. Can you imagine that when based on research, it shows that just 1% of female genital mutilation which have been practiced in Cameroon, but in actuality, I don't think it's just 1%, and that 1% was recorded since 2014. One of the causes or one of the things that triggers female genital mutilation, it's economic. People need money, and it's a lucrative business for those individuals who practice that. With the rise of a crisis in the north, as well as the Anglophone crisis in the south and northwest region, that practice is still going on. And there is a research which shows that in January 2022 in Yaoundé, it has been recorded that many females have gone to the hospital, and it proved that they have been practiced or they have been a victim of that female genital mutilations. The government will hide that because it's been stated that it's abolished, and it was abolished in the year 2010, if I'm not mistaken, 2010, which had been stated that, but in actuality, it's still being practiced. And we also had another meeting with other organizations, other individuals from Kenya, as well as Niger, and Ethiopia, and they still practice this activity. First, if these regions or these individuals who practice that, they're able to move to the other communities and do that, they have to pay other individuals they'll pay other individuals to manifest that practice in the youth. So it's cultural. It's cultural. How can you change that cultural mindset from it? Firstly, we have to empower them first economically. So those are the reasons why. And secondly, concerning the work we do, we have monthly activities, monthly events. Just like this March, we have on human rights violations. And from this, we're going to come up with a journal. So we request for every presenter to send their work to us through our Gmail account, where we can gather all this information, write the journal to it, and to recommend to other organizations as international as well as government, where we can say this is what we have come together to do, and how can we eradicate it? Because we're coming up with strategies. It's another platform where we have to research, come out straight out, we have to reduce, mitigate, and prevent these violations. These violations. So next time I'm gonna inform you like 1 month ahead of what we do, because next month we're gonna focus on responsibility to protect civilians. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna invite you again, talk about issues, how we can really protect these IDPs as well as states also. So thank you so much. Do you have any questions from the presenters and participants? Mulu, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. No, it's your telephone. Yeah, I was wondering if my question is directed to Chebet. So Miss Chebet, I don't know, is she around? Hello.
Hello,
Okay,
sorry,
anyway,
my mic was. I'm still here. I'm here.
okay. You were talking about the closing of some of these camps, of some of the
Yeah.
refugee camps. Yeah. So I don't know what regulations do they take do they put in place before closing these camps? Because when you close a refugee camp, to think about that number of unstable, I don't like to call them unstable people. I mean unsettled individuals roaming about. Does that not pose a security threat to the host country? So I want to know what measures you put in place before those camps get shut down. Because I would not want to believe that they just get up one morning and decide to close a refugee camp. Thank you.
All right. I've tried to find out what specific plans they have to be able to avoid, like you said, the refugees posing as a security threat. but they have not shared the plan with us. What they have said is that they will just give jobs to those who are qualified to have jobs. So I believe they have a plan where they will have to prove that they are refugees, maybe provide documents from their mother country or something like that. But I don't know. They have not shared the plan. But as soon as they do, I'll be sure to share it with you.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mulu. Any questions? All right, I have a question for Pontus. Pontus, thank you so much for your. Are you there, Pontus? Let's say.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, thank you.
I cannot hear you, sorry.
Okay, sorry. So thank you so much for your presentation, with your elaborate information about the historical evolution of human rights, how when it started, where is it going to, and you spoke so much about how relevant it is in the African context, as well as in the Indian context, as well as the American context. You know, there have been so many implementations of these human rights. We have organizations which have done so much on human rights, especially with the Amnesty International, Amnesty International. And you know, this human rights issue, people, many, or let me say, 65% of individuals take it personally. They're really so passionate about that. But the rest of the population will have less concern of it. Either first of all, say the economic, social, cultural, as we have mentioned in the previous presentation, we realize that there are a lot of cultural issues, no, not political, cultural issues, in terms of social, in terms of the women, as well as the men. So you as a human rights activist, you as a practitioner, what do you think, what are the best strategies you could give to organizations, to individuals personally, what is needed to be done to protect themselves? We are already aware what is needed to be done with the implementation with the policies. But you, because I research on what you do, and I'm really impressed by your aspiration and what you tend to do. So if you're advising me as Pauline, if you're advising us as an organization, what do you think it's really pertinent for us to watch out for? Thank you. It's okay.
First of all, yeah, thank you for your question. I feel I'm of the opinion that the gap between states, uh, institutions, and the people has to be bridged. You know, that interaction, I think Molo mentioned when he was doing his presentation about the social contract. You know, that harmony, that marriage that exists between the state and its people. Because one thing we have to understand, right? Every person has needs and wants. The things that you need constitute, or they are derived from your essence. You want to survive. You want to be comfortable. You want to be happy. In other words, you want to flourish. Those are key indicators, key factors that make up human dignity. You want to be respected. You want to be valued. You want your opinions to be heard. You want to be appreciated. I mean, at the very basic level, every person has this, you know, even when you work. Why do you work? Why do you go to school? You know, why do you aspire for a better life? You want to put yourself in a position where your life as an individual can impact your family and your community in a positive way that will bring you fulfillment. Now, what organizations do is they want to help you achieve these desires that you have. We understand that you have these desires, but there are prevailing circumstances that may potentially hinder you from realizing these things that you really want to do. So we are here as an organization to protect and promote these desires, these rights, this dignity that you are so craving for. That is why we have come to ensure that you actually realize or fulfill these desires that you have. You know, because there are dimensions of human rights: the right to protect, to promote, and fulfill. Okay, so we want to help you create an enabling environment where these rights that you have and these things that you need to flourish should be realized. That is why also high-end organizations like the Amnesty, you know, the Human Rights Watch, the RFK Human Rights, and all, they need to work together with community-based organizations. These community-based organizations are in a position where they can directly relate with the people within those communities. These organizations understand the daily lives of the people. They understand what the people need because they interact with these people almost on a daily basis. You know, so when implementing projects, when implementing development plans, states have to be microscopic. They go down to the level of the councils. They should go down to the level of the councils. The councils should go down to the level of the chiefs, who are the auxiliaries of the administration, right? That way the chiefs can then be the direct focal persons, you know, to reach the needs of the people. They need to carry out sometimes open door, you know, feedback or review data collection process. Ask the people, what is it that you guys as a community, what do you people need? You know, sometimes you may come with good intention to help someone, but what you bring as help is not exactly what that person needs at the moment. If I come and I meet, for instance, I think Chebet was talking about refugees. I cannot come to a refugee camp, right? And then the first thing I start talking about is people have a right to freedom of expression, blah, 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 blah. Yes, it is true. But where they are right now, freedom of expression is not their primary concern. They are basic things they need for survival. Food and non-food items first. You know, to first of all make sure that they are in hygienic conditions, they have something to eat. Once that is done, we can then engage other levels of conversation. So if you ask me, going down to the very microscopic level, there need to be that understanding, identifying. That is why even humanitarian organizations, they carry out what we call a needs assessment. Okay, when you do a needs assessment, then you will be able to identify what exactly these people need at this material time. Then you do resource mobilization, and then you implement your project to meet those needs you have identified. And all of this promote, you know, the realization of human dignity. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Pontus. Let's know that when we use the bottom top approach in like with the African context, it's mostly it's always it's just a cultural thing, because you're going to meet the local chiefs, the local councils, they always tell you these people are so attached to their cultural values that they feel that if they're not able to like substitute something, either it's money, either something economically, socially, in terms of what you explain about the needs, the basic needs of individuals. So it's always a challenge, especially the violations when it comes to child marriages. Child marriages, we also have about expression here of political participation of women. Those areas are really issues that have really been fought or really been debatable, whereby these institutions find a lot of difficulties in really changing the minds or trying to prove that what you're doing it's wrong. But we just keep trying and keep pushing hard, and we can't really compare ourselves with the developed world, whereby they they have provided platforms where everybody can participate, contribute, and can also be heard in terms of when their rights have been violated. So I have a question for Faustin. Faustin, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, Faustin. Okay, Faustin, you spoke about the IDPs in Walla. I can you imagine what's happening in Walla and what the individuals are going through. It's sure the condition really deplorable. But thank you so much for your efforts as well. My question is with your research you have done when we meet the people, with the scale of 1 to 10, what has the government done for these refugees? What has the government done for these refugees? Two, what organizations are really working with you? Are you working alone? Thirdly, the resources. The resources. Do you guys just go and meet them, ask them questions, or do you provide them with something they can hold on to? Because when you are in a suffering situation, what you care about, you want to be happy. Even if you're not happy, but you need something that, even if you're giving out an information, you need something to put in your mouth. So how do the people cooperate? How do people believe in what you're saying? And how do they try to express themselves? So how are you going to carry out this project when you try to take that data from them? So hope it's understood.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. Are you all getting me? Okay, you just asked me 3 questions. The first was the role of the government. What is the government doing? The second question was which organizations am I working with? That's which organizations Lodge and IDP is working with, right? And the third question is the resources. How do we get our resources? I don't know if was that the third question. How do we get our resources?
In terms of the resources, right? We are meeting
Yes.
We are meeting with the IDPs. You don't just
Yes.
ask questions. Do you provide them with something? How do they relate with you? Or rather, they don't just believe in what you're saying. So what are the mechanisms you're using to get such the resources? Is it physical? Is it psychological?
Okay, I'll begin with the first question. I don't know if something has been done by the government, because most of the time when the government brings in assistance for these persons, those who, you will surprise you that those who benefit are not even the vulnerable IDPs. Those who benefit from such assistance are not even Anglophones. Those who benefit from such assistance are not even vulnerable. That is again one reason why we decided to conduct our assessment needs. That is another reason why we decided to conduct another assessment study, because we discovered that most of the time assistance is being pied in the hands of a minority, leaving a majority hopeless, selfless. And also, most of the time, assistance is being given to those who are not in need, to those who are not vulnerable, leaving those in need hopeless. That is why we decided to conduct our sectoral needs assessment study, to first of all identify all of them in Dollar Four municipality. Dollar Four municipality is Bonaberry. covering all neighborhoods at Bonaberi, know their needs, their talents and capabilities, and why not propose this data to potential actors apart from the government, potential actors like UN organizations, foundations, corporate organizations, so that they see the need of partnering with us. So together we provide sustainable assistance to these persons. But so far, the government has been doing its best, but to the best of my knowledge, most of the time, those who benefit from such assistance are not even those the vulnerable internally displaced persons. And so that's a problem. That's a problem, really. And then the second question, Lodge and IDP, you said the second question is which organizations are working with us? Lodge and IDP have some men and women of goodwill assisting her once in a while. And also, for now, we do not have a permanent organization, but we are still trying to liaise contacts. We are already in touch with some few organizations who have already received our work, what we are doing. We've met already one-on-one to discuss. And so we are just keeping our hands together and then while being patient, looking at hoping for better tomorrow with organizations. But for now, we are single-handedly conducting our studies. Lodge and IDP single-handedly conducting its studies. But while doing so, we try to do a lot of communication so that people can come on board, organizations can come on board. So for now, that is it about Lodge and IDP. Then the third question, Lodge and IDP, remember before we go conduct our study, we have a team. We have a team. It is true the team is not really permanent. We train them. So before going to the field to collect data from these persons, we do not work. Our strategy is we do not work with quarter heads. We do not work with community leaders, because when you go meet them to collect information concerning vulnerable internally displaced persons, they gather their friends in the quarters, their boyfriends, their girlfriends, or the like, saying that they are IDPs. Meanwhile, they are not. That explains now the fact why when government authorities come to giving assistance, they contact those quarter heads who in relation contact now their own persons. You see now that those who are really in need do not benefit from such assistance. That's another reason why we do not contact them when we go to conduct our studies. But we have a backup from the $4 Council Mayor, who already is in line with all our reports and knows what we are doing. And so he's still looking to see how we can partner together. He is aware of what we are doing. And so when we are entering a community or a neighborhood to conduct our study, we don't inform anyone, because if you inform them, people will tend to gather, and you see the information you want to collect will be false. So the kind of info, we have a friendly environment with the vulnerable internally displaced persons. If you call me today that you want to go to this neighborhood in Bonaberi, for instance, Dobo or Rai or Mabanda, I don't live there, but we have a friendly environment. When they receive my call, I am the one, Lodge and IDP. They are so glad to receive my call already. Just the fact that they are receiving my call, it's already a lot of hopes, because we collect data not to keep and sleep on it. No, it's for concrete actions to be taken. So I don't know if I've answered your questions, the moderator.
Oh, of course you can. Oh, sorry, of course you have. So I now gonna talk more about this personally, and how we can engage more organizations and more strategies on how to really help these IDPs. You know, when these IDPs meet meet with other society, there's kind of a conflict. So how do we manage that conflict? How do we deal with it? How do we protect them? How do we provide for these IDPs in Cameroon? And you know that the more they are neglected, the more they feel more pain, the more the wound is getting more deepened. You know, they are individuals who have the right to belong in Cameroon, but if you're not given the opportunity for them to belong, it's quite a challenge for them. So thank you so much for staying. We're going to talk about this more privately and what we could do for them. So my last question goes now to Chebet. Are you there? To Chebet?
Yes, Pauline, I'm here.
Okay, so my question goes thus. You spoke about how the government intend closing the camps by June. Have they said to the public what are the strategies, or these refugees, where are they going to go to? Is there any plan? Is there any plan for them afterwards? Sure, your neighboring countries are going to be affected by these refugees. I know it's too much work on the government of Kenya to really harbor these refugees. So now that they are going to intend closing it by June, as a media personnel, what do you think? What do you think there's a better strategy as a media personnel to spread more information to the neighboring countries or to the individuals? Or rather, do you feel that this is the best way whereby these refugees can be welcome, or rather they can fend for themselves, not to be depending so much on the government? And what about the international organization? Are they also aware of the actions done by the government of Kenya?
Okay, thank you so much for that question, Pauline. Indeed, it is going to have impacts even to neighboring countries. And I'm trying to see what the government said they will do to help these refugees relocate well. And like I just said earlier, they do not have a clear plan. As a matter of fact, we don't have our high court refused that move for the camps to be closed. So we are waiting for a final decision. But meanwhile, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, that is UNHCR, and the government of Kenya in April 2021 gave a set of options available to refugees who would like like after the camps are closed. So that one of them includes voluntary return to for refugees in their country, or to other countries which are not their countries and are not Kenya. And they said they'll put various arrangement and alternative stay options in Kenya for certain refugees, only from those who are from the East African community. The East African community is Uganda, Kenya, Burundi, Rwanda, and Tanzania. So, so far, they've only said that the ones who will be able to stay in Kenya are those ones from the East African community countries. Now, another option they're giving is for voluntary repatriation. This means that most, if not all, of the countries where these refugees come from are not safe for them to return. So if you say voluntary repatriation, that means if I know my country is not safe, of course I will not want to return. So these conditions are still very fragile, and this option is not this option is not very viable for the majority of refugees and those asylum seekers in Kenya. Because you understand, if you tell someone go back to your country, and there's a reason why they're here, so that is an option that I think is not does not hold a lot of water. It is not logical for the government of Kenya to say you can return to your country, and yet the country, their own country is still not safe. So it is still not safe for them to return to their country. That is one option they are giving. The other option now, like I said, departure to third countries. Like now, if you're a refugee from South Sudan, you come to Kenya. Now, since they are closing that camp, they're telling you go to another country if you can't go to your country, but you can't stay in Kenya. So you see that again, there are very limited opportunities available for refugees to resettle in third countries, which also makes this option available only to a small fraction of people currently in Kakuma and Dadaab camps. So again, I don't think it is a sustainable option for all of those who would need to move due to the closure of the camp. Now, the option now, which I had given you earlier also, is the part where they have been told to be integrated into the country, to be integrated in Kenya. And as you know, a refugee is perceived to be integrated into the asylum country when he or she becomes a citizen. So this is the condition. You have to become a citizen. In fact, this information is just coming to me now. I had not found this information, but yes, I'm seeing here that integration into Kenya will have to make that refugee a citizen first. and that is through naturalization or when they enjoy a legal status that provides for effective access to socioeconomic and civil fundamental rights. Now, there's a provision in there's a 1951 convention relating to the status of refugees and the protocol that establishes that as much as is possible, facilitation and facilitating the integration and naturalization of refugees. It says that refugees should have access to basic rights, among other things. Now, there's making them citizens and there's them accessing basic rights. Now, this include being given work permits to access the labor market. Like I was telling you, they're going to be given employment opportunities so that they'll be able to establish small business and self-employment activities and be able to access legal statuses, such as going to access, for example, if you have been violated, you can be able to go to court and you will be listened to. Another thing that they will be able to access is what else? Access to legal statuses and applying for permanent residency. So these are things that they'll have to apply for. They'll have to apply for citizenship and they'll have to apply for work permits. They'll have to apply for permanent residency. But now the pathway to legal status in Kenya is very complex for refugees. And I'm not sure of the exact number of refugees that have been successfully integrated. And so far, I don't think they are many. So it will take a whole lot of process. For example, in Kenya, I've never heard of a single refugee who has been issued with a work permit. But I think I'm going to do a new story. I'm thinking of doing a feature, a story about that to be aired in our media house. So these are the gaps that are there in terms of refugees in Kenya. They are closing the camps, but the conditions they have after the closure of the camps are not very clear. They are vague. And so we are left wondering what happens to these refugees. So I foresee a lot of challenges, and I don't think it is safe. It is going to be any safe for these refugees when these camps are closed. I can't remember his name. Let me check. I don't know if it is Joseph, who asked about the security of if refugees posing as a security threat. That is also a huge concern. And again, unfortunately, Kenya has not come up with a clear plan on how they will be able to distinguish who is a real a genuine refugee and who is coming in as a security threat. Yeah, I think that's all the information I have about refugees for now. And this, I thank you guys because this webinar has really opened my mind wide to be able to now see this as a story idea. And I think I'm going to visit these camps and talk to these people so that I can find out more about the state of these refugees, what they feel about it before June. Yeah. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you so much, Chebet, for your response. Beautiful to hear that. And I would love to know the final story about the refugees in Kenya. Hopefully by June, the government will come up with a sustainable plan for these individuals, because they need to be heard, they need to be protected as well. Because when we think about them, what about the children? And so people have gotten married in the camps. What about the children? What about them if the parents are not having a place to stay? What about the children? So it's kind of an issue whereby we have to protect everyone. They have human rights, and this is a platform whereby we have to help these individuals and prevent as well as protect and to bring out solutions, sustainable solutions to help eradicate this ill and to make sure our society is a peaceful place to live in. So thank you so much, Chebet. Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you, Faustin. Thank you, Abang, for respecting the time, for being with us for close to 2 hours. I really didn't expect it was going to stay for this long, but it was quite a very refreshing event where we spoke about a lot of things that people were ignorant about, things I thought we have we are already aware, but rather we need to know them detailing. So I appreciate everyone, and hopefully you're gonna meet up again in the various events, because next month we're talking about responsibility to protect. Because every month Wem'Afrika gonna host an event online, either online or physical, concerning pertinent issues every month, and we're gonna post on our social media handles what needed to be done, how we can meet up to this organization, how we can meet with the individuals, on how to protect and provide for them. All right, before leaving, please could you put on your camera so I could take a picture and post them on our social media handles, where I'm gonna send you the recorded version of this event, so we can post it on social media handles. So thank you so much. This is my phone. Aban, please could you put your camera on? Joseph, please could you? Okay. Abang, please. All right. Okay, let's see. All right, it's good now. Thank you so much, and do all have a lovely day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Austin.
Thank you so much, Pauline, and everyone else.
Thank you.